Get ready for the best holiday sale of the year. For a limited time, enjoy 50% off annual news subscriptions at inforum.news/gift. That's right, 50% off unlimited access to local news so you can stay informed and connected to your community. It's a gift you'll want to give yourself. This incredible holiday offer ends December 22nd, so don't miss out. Subscribe now at inforum.news/gift.
Welcome to Plain Talk. Sometimes I think North Dakotans, I don't know what I want to call it. I don't know how I want to say it, but we, self-loathing's not the right term, but we have this feeling that like North Dakotans aren't really that important, right? Or North Dakota's not really important to the nation, and sometimes we get a little bit of a chip on our shoulder about it, and sometimes we just sort of accept it for reality. But here's the thing. North Dakota, we have some leadership in Congress right now that is in the room where it happens. If I can quote Hamilton, our Congressman Kelly Armstrong is first of all, he's basically vice chair of the Energy Committee in the House of Representatives, and he's going to be stepping in and leading a delegation to Dubai to attend the United Nations Climate Summit, and this is a really big deal. Not least, it's a big deal for North Dakota. It's a big deal for our country, but also, from my perspective, the perspective that's going to be presented is one that's kind of desperately needed in the climate debate. And sometimes I think that gets overlooked when we're talking about things like, are we, what energy source are we going to use in the future? We kind of look over the fact of our energy needs right now. And North Dakota is a place where a lot of things are made, right? There's a joke about how people who shop in the grocery store don't understand where the food comes from. Well, North Dakota is where the food comes from. North Dakota is where the energy comes from. I think we understand, not to say that other points of view on these issues aren't relevant. I'm just saying that ours is relevant, and sometimes it gets overlooked. Anyway, leading a congressional delegation to the United Nations Climate Summit is Congressman Kelly Armstrong. He's also my guest, along with my co-host, Chad Oban. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Kelly's
laughing because Chad's excited. Kelly's laughing because Chad's excited that I remembered to introduce him for once.
Although I think about 1 out of 10.
I think I'm like 2 for 10. I'm 2 for 10, something like that. I'm batting 200, which is more than Juan Soto is going to vote for bat for the New York Yankees when he plays next year.
It's weird. It took you exactly 3 minutes to talk about the Soto Yankees trade.
The Soto Yankees trade, if I had my way, it would be the only thing we would be talking about right now. But alas, I do not get paid to talk about baseball.
What are they going to do with Stanton?
I don't know. DH him a whole bunch, probably. I mean, he can.
By a whole bunch, you mean like 25 games a year where he's healthy enough to play?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by a whole bunch?
Listen, all right, you're pouring salt in the wound. I know. I'm not going to defend Giancarlo Stanton. I think he's a very, very nice guy. I think he's a great dude whose body just can't stay healthy on the field. Anyway, this is not what we're here to talk about.
The Dodgers can get Ohtani, and then instead of not going to the playoffs, he could lose in the first round.
There you go. Oh man.
Yeah, it
might be safer for us to talk climate change here.
And I also, a Mets fan, to be giving a tough time to a team that actually makes the playoffs is another interesting tidbit.
I was just what are you going to bring to a Mets fan that I haven't heard for 25 years? I got nothing.
Mets fans wear the calluses of their wounds the team has inflicted like armor. All right, here we go. Climate Change Summit. Kelly, how did you come into this gig? Because normally you would expect the chair of the committee. In fact, the chair of the committee, Representative Rogers, was going to be leading it, but she had to step out, and you're in. How did that come about?
I always thought being vice chair of the committee meant I just take attendance at hearings, but I think I'm on the energy subcommittee. We've been engaged in this. I served on the select committee on the climate crisis prior to that,
And I think we bring a reasonable, rational viewpoint that's based in reality and not ideology into what this looks like going forward. And whether that's oil, whether that's natural gas, whether that's electric, whether that's wind, whether that's solar, or whether that's nuclear, all of those power sources are going to be used more in a decade than they are right now. And that's the reality of the world economy. And so instead of talking about this stuff through ideological viewpoints, we should talk about it in a place that where we have our friends and our allies providing the world energy as opposed to our strategic adversaries.
Kelly, who's part of the delegation? Is it a Republican delegation? Is it bipartisan?
It's bipartisan. It is mostly energy and commerce members, but there are some other members. Julia Letlow from Louisiana is going. Garrett Graves is going, but it is a bipartisan congressional delegation. It is far and away the largest delegation of Republicans that has ever been led to COP. And I think that's important too, because Republicans were late to this game. I mean, they were late to the recognition of this. And I think from a state that produces a lot of things that we don't consume there, regardless of how we got there, people are demanding that we do things cleaner and we do things better. And the one thing North Dakotans are good at, whether it's in the ag sector, whether it's in the energy sector, whether it's in the power generation sector, is we're pretty good at giving consumers what they want. But our goal here is to make sure that people recognize places like North Dakota and the United States are part of the solution and not part of the problem.
You know, one thing that I heard, I mean, obviously this event is being held in Dubai, in the Middle East. So we're talking about a major oil producer. I think one of the people that's acting as the host or the chair of the conference is also from a major. And so there's been kind of an outcry saying, you know, how can we have a climate change conference that is based in an oil producing country and everything else? And then I've even seen, you know, some slaps. I mean, you're from an oil producing state. You have a background.
I've been in the business since before I was born.
I was just going to mention that your family is in yourself literally in the oil business. So some of the same comments about you. Why would we want somebody like this leading a climate change delegation? Speak to that.
The world's going to use more oil in 10 years than it uses now. You could do any climate metric. You can do any of those different things. OPEC Plus and Russia control 48% of the world market in oil. You know, we spend even our U.S. regulators do all this hand-wringing over Chevron and purchasing Hess and all of these different things. If you look at all of those mergers and acquisitions with U.S. companies over the last decade, that's about 4% of all the world's production. The reality is the world is going to be thirsty for these fuel sources, and they're going to be consumed. And we should have them being consumed in the most responsible and climate responsible way possible. But at the same time, recognize that wishing it so from a seventh floor penthouse in Norway or Manhattan or Berlin isn't going to change the fact that there are a ton of people that need cheap and reliable energy to lift themselves out of poverty, and they're going to get it somewhere.
Well, can I work in a Game of Thrones reference too? Littlefinger tells us that we can only make peace with our enemies. And I don't want to make it sound like we have to be enemies here, but if you don't include people from oil-producing states in North Dakota or oil-producing interests or oil-producing countries, then it's just a bunch of greenies sitting around talking to each other. And how do you make progress from that?
Well, you don't, and you have to deal with this. And I think the biggest fundamental conversation change that I've started to see in this, outside of nuclear, which if you're talking about decarbonization and you're not talking about expanding nuclear energy, you're just not seriously talking about it. If all you are dealing on weather-dependent power without the ability to store it, then you're not having a serious conversation. But the other part to this is there are places, Guyana in just on the northern coast of South America, just next to Venezuela, who is one of the poorest countries in the world, is going to be the richest country in the world per capita within the next 7 years because of an oil discovery off their shores. That's getting developed. There is no way a country that has traditionally had as much of the poverty and problems that Guyana has had is going to listen to anybody who's sitting in one of these rooms and say they should only do wind and solar. So then the question is who's going to help them develop this? Is it going to be Iran? Is it going to be China? Is it going to be Russia? Or is it going to be American companies that know how to do this? And we should have that conversation. But our answer is, how do we do it as clean as possible, as opposed to what kind of electron you put on the grid?
Congressman, this has always been a conversation that has frustrated me from both sides. And maybe it's from being somebody who's left of center in an oil and coal state, that, I think you've got on one side, you've got the progressives who are like, this has to happen right this second. We have to decarbonize the whole world. And just because it's the right thing to do, we're going to do it. Ignoring the jobs, ignoring the fact that I like to turn on my lights in the morning, all those different things. But then on the other side, I think we are getting cleaner on producing energy, but maybe not at the pace that we need to be doing in our country and then in other countries. How do you sort of bring those sides together, right? I mean, we have to do something, but how can we accelerate it? I mean, I don't like to get into one day the weather is bad, but we are seeing a lot of weather catastrophes in this country. I think climate change is real. How do you figure out the pace when there's such different perspectives on this?
Well, and you and I may have a different opinion on this, Chad, but mine is when you can do it at an economic scale that doesn't drive up the cost of energy to the most vulnerable people. You can't pace. You can do all of these things as clean as possible if you're willing to spend significantly higher percentages of your income in order to do it. Cheap, reliable, and affordable are as important as clean. And I'll just use wind and solar as an example, right? A lot of the reasons that is cheaper is because of government programs that allow it to be cheaper. Fine, great. We get to do those things. All of the above exists everywhere in North Dakota, but we don't have a way to store it. And the answer can't be, well, we'll figure that out, because when you don't have it, you don't know when it figures out. Right? We didn't know how to crack shale rock 2 miles below North Dakota until someday we did. And so one of the frustrations I have is when you talk about carbon capture, or you talk about, carbon scrubbing, or all of that, they're like, the technology isn't there. I'm like, okay. And that's true, particularly to scale. Same thing with hydrogen, same thing with, refuse methane and all of those different places. But you know where else the technology isn't there? Storing renewable energy. We can put up wind and solar panels everywhere in the United States. You know what we can't export? That energy. You can't export it.
Kelly, I do think that's somewhere where we should all agree, right? This is going to come down to technology, right? This is going to, how do you make carbon capture work if you're not starting to develop the technology? And the people saying, no, let's not do it because it's not there yet. Well, how the hell do you get there unless you start trying to get there?
But I think so. One of the things that we've noticed is, whether it's getting infrastructure in the ground or whether it's research dollars, we're technology neutral research. We don't care what the input is. We care what the output is. Right. And the output is cleaner, more reliable energy that you can deliver to your population at scale. And for far too many, which is where we're getting in a lot of different places, and not all of them, but a lot of them, is they want the focus on wind and solar. And I don't care what the focus is, as long as it's reliable and affordable.
How do we get to a point where, obviously oil, we have a lot of oil, we have a lot of gas, we have a lot of coal in the United States. And I think sometimes, I don't know. Maybe you kind of already answered my question, but it seems like I don't really care. Like we have certain realities that we have to, and they're not even, whether you want to believe in climate change or not, they're market realities, right? I mean, the people who buy the oil and buy the gas and everything. And by the way, I believe climate change is real. I'm not denying it, but I'm saying,
me too.
I'm saying as a political question, it's a market reality that we need to be able to sell energy that produces less carbon. All the people who dig coal or drill for oil or produce gas in North Dakota, we need to be able to do that in a less carbon neutral way. Maybe this is my point, is that
doesn't disadvantage American companies on the world stage by allowing the bad actors to continue to act with impunity and virtue signaling with U.S. and Western companies.
Well, that was the point I was going to make. America, if we look at a lot of the rest of the world, America does a pretty good job. We have made a ton of progress on our emissions. We're doing pretty good. There's a lot of countries that are not. Iran, a lot of countries, by the way, that we're competing with. Russia, China. I think sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about what more we could do in the United States. We could make, because emissions are a global issue. Like, it doesn't matter if something's emitted in North Dakota or, India. It doesn't matter. It's going into the same fishbowl we all live in. So how do we get it? Like, I feel like by constantly making the United States the focus of attention for what needs to be done, we're glossing over places where we can make a lot of progress on emissions by just getting them up to American standards. So how do we, it feels like if at a conference like this, it feels like that would be an important thing to talk about. How do we get other countries on our level?
Well, I think that's true. And I will also say, policy matters in this space. And we'll use Western North Dakota as an example. You're not going to see a lot of EVs in Western North Dakota in 10 years, no matter what the market looks like or all of that. But what you could see a lot of? Hybrids. Like hybrids, like a car that will drive. Toyota's got hybrids, these type of issues, but we've created a policy where hybrids don't get the benefits that the electric vehicles get. And you're looking at it and going, well, that doesn't work in places that have to haul horse trailers or have 40 below weather and all of those things. But I think the other answer to that is we have to not take this position of the virtue signaling leader, particularly in a space where there are other actors that will fill the void, because the void is necessary. Because the second part to this is there are millions and millions and millions of people in developing countries all over the world, and there are governments in those countries that's number one concern is not climate change. And it's not going to be climate change. It's going to be how to feed and how to bring their citizens out of poverty. And if we cede that market to Russia and China, that's far more consequential even than climate change, because we're ceding geopolitical relationships in a way that is unhealthy for the United States, and it's unhealthy for the world.
Kelly, former President Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord and sort of pulled back the United States in terms of being part of some of these conversations. And I think everything you just said makes a lot of sense. We have to be part of these conversations. Did the former president make a mistake by sort of not participating at an international level the way the country should?
No, and I really don't think so, particularly because you excluded the world's second largest economy from those accords. And secondly, the United States, the only country that actually met the Paris Climate Accord reductions after we pulled ourselves out. And this is what I mean by a bad deal is better than no deal, Chad, or is worse than no deal. And when you are when you are saying China is exempt from a deal that everybody else has to follow with, it's a bad deal. And unfortunately, the UN does far too many of those.
Kelly, the other news coming out of your office today is that you introduced an impeachment inquiry resolution. Now, for those of us, I think most people listening to this podcast know about impeachment and the rudimentary, but what is? Sometimes I feel like there's procedures here that what does this mean? What is the resolution? What does it accomplish?
So the inquiry resolution we will have hopefully a vote on the House floor next week to authorize it. It gets in a little bit in the weeds, but to understand, about 2 weeks ago, the White House sent us a letter through the investigative committees saying they weren't going to participate in interviews. They were going to ignore subpoenas. And this puts us in the best legal position in court to fight for our Article 1 authority to continue down this investigation. It's actually mirrors very similar what happened when I was on Judiciary in the minority when they did it with Speaker Pelosi. I think we have the authority now. I didn't really get into that fight in the minority. It wasn't my fight to have when I was there. But if we are going to be fighting about getting documentation or forcing transcribed interviews or depositions, this will allow us to have Congress in the best position possible to win those fights.
So, Kelly, you mentioned the previous administration. I assume there was a vote on impeachment inquiry at that time, or was there not?
Yes, this is actually tracking very similar.
Those things?
I did not. And I anticipate no Democrats will vote for this one either.
But isn't that so? If the goal is to come to the truth and put yourself in the best position for Congress on legal footings and to get to the truth, why should it matter if it's a Republican president or a Democrat president? For all of you, I'm thinking both caucuses. Take a step back, because I don't know how anybody looks at this stuff and just doesn't think, Well, we're about 11 months from an election. This is just another election ploy, and this just reeks of partisanship.
Well, I would point to this. We have actually uncovered a lot of evidence, and I said this in my release, and I mean it. There is no investigation in any jurisdiction in the country that wouldn't continue forward with the evidence we have. That doesn't mean we have enough to impeach. That is a longer, different conversation that will continue to occur. But when you have the White House sending you a letter saying they're not going to comply with your Article 1 ability to conduct oversight, this is the single best way to do it. And
but wouldn't that have been the best way to do it for Trump too? Now, why are Republicans just going after the Democrat president and Democrats are just going after the Republican president? We're broken, man, and this is just another step towards that partisanship.
Well, and the flip side of that, though, Chad, is we're not going to unilaterally disarm. We're not. When you set a new standard and you continue down this road, and the other answer is the answers that we're getting are. It's not that they're insufficient. They're obstinate. We have $24 million over the course of 5 years, monthly payments coming. We have a $200,000 check and another $40,000 check that got flagged by a bank as suspicious activity from the Communist Party of China. And the answer is that never happened. That's the answer we get. Well, we know it happened.
Jared Kushner and Ivanka made $640 million while they're working in the White House.
But they also had business. Like, these guys made $24 million. All right, you're sitting here right now. You follow politics. What was the legitimate business that got paid $24 million? What was it?
I don't know the answer to that, but I also don't know how Ivanka and Jared made $640 million while they're sitting in the White House.
Well, my argument would be that
a $2 billion contract after he came out of the White House from Saudi Arabia.
Sure.
I mean,
my argument is Democrats had the majority. The Democrats had the majority for 4 years. Why didn't they do anything with that? Why didn't they? I couldn't have stopped it. I could have voted no every time. They couldn't do it. I said this
maybe
to Jamie
because
Rouse.
it would have been silly partisanship.
As opposed to the Mueller investigation.
Let me see if I can get this back on the rails. So I do worry that Republicans only want to hold Democrats accountable and Democrats only want to hold Republicans accountable, and that's kind of what this looks like. Because frankly, I think there was plenty of grounds for the impeachment of Donald Trump, and I think there's plenty of grounds I think there's plenty of grounds to proceed with the investigation. I mean, there's stuff here that worries me about what happened around the Biden administration. There are legitimate things. I have a hard time, but I think the public has a hard time taking Republicans seriously when they won't hold Donald Trump to the same standard.
Well, I mean, all I can tell you is we have an investigation that is being obstructed by the current occupant of the White House, and they refuse to answer it. And they refuse to provide emails. They refuse to provide documents. And just yesterday, the president just flat out lied to the press and said that never happened. And we're like, well, I have a piece of paper that shows it happened. Like, I have a bank that basically self-audited themselves because they were so concerned about it. And the answer isn't even anything other than just no. And if you're going to send a letter basically telling us we're not going to cooperate with you in any way whatsoever, we have one remedy at our disposal, and this is it, and we should do it.
I mean, the impeachment process, ultimately, I mean, if the impeachment process if you find enough to impeach, then it goes to the Senate Senate finds enough to convict. The whole point is removing somebody from office, right? And I understand we're still gathering evidence. You have said there may not be enough to impeach. So I don't want to say that you're just trying to remove Joe Biden. I understand that for you, this is a process. That said, I mean, if it ultimately produces evidence that says that Joe Biden did some of this stuff and thus he's not fit to be in office, then why doesn't that apply to Donald Trump, who's under 91 criminal indictments?
Well, Donald Trump got impeached twice in the U.S. House of Representatives. They were very good at it. The current ranking member of oversight called for his impeachment before he was sworn in.
Yeah.
My point is Donald Trump is not in office, and I wasn't in the majority at that point in time. I wasn't in those rooms.
He is likely to be on the ballot.
Well, sure.
Speaking of which,
you can't impeach a candidate.
Speaking of which, North Dakota's 2 senators have endorsed now Donald Trump for president. Are you making an endorsement at this point? Are you?
I have not. I've been dealing with this side of this stuff. I'm leading an 18 delegation to COP. I've been working on trying to get a legal and credible impeachment inquiry resolution filed. This all happened. I'm proud of Doug Burgum for what he did. I think the world could use more Doug Burgum. I think his solutions to things and his ideas about innovation and states' rights versus an overbearing federal government were a great thing to have in the conversation. But to be honest, I didn't even have time to watch the debate last night.
Kelly, sorry. Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, Kelly, there's been some pretty big things in the last week or so in Congress in terms of Santos being asked to leave.
No, we expelled him. And by the way, Republicans voted to expel him. So it's not that we only hold the other side accountable.
Most of the House Republican caucus did not.
Yeah. And I don't know what the vote was on Jamal Bowman, but I know he was censured as well. And I hope Democrats voted for that censure. Very few. Well, they should have, and they should kick Menendez out as well while they're there. But then also Kevin McCarthy's announced that he's leaving in a couple months. That, the political effects of this is that's, you had a slim majority to start out with, and now you've lost a couple more seats for the short term. What does that look like in terms of governing over the next 11 months? Does it matter?
We had 19 Republicans vote against a rule vote right before Thanksgiving, so I'm not particularly concerned about it because our 4-vote majority only exists when we don't have 15 people throw a temper tantrum about something. Actually, when Kevin's decision, their filing deadline is December 8th, and if he would leave Congress after December 31st, Newsom would never have to call a special election. So it's a Republican leaning seat. All political prognosticators will tell you a Republican will win that seat. This will at least force that election to happen before the next election. So, yeah, we have a tight majority. It's even at the beginning of Congress, I joked we should put a hazardous activities clause in our rules package. Nobody could have a motorcycle, those types of things. But the reality is it's whether it's 3 votes or 4 votes, we have really not wielded the procedural powers of the majority very well, in my opinion, and it's been very frustrating.
I want to ask you, obviously we talked about Doug Burgum dropping out, it's obviously the people like me who like to talk and write about this stuff, it sets off a lot of speculation about what's going to happen. Is he going to run for a 3rd term? If he doesn't run for a 3rd, we asked you this question back in June, and it was obviously couched in, if Doug Burgum were to be elected president, obviously he can't be governor as well. Would you be interested? Have you had any conversations with Governor Burgum about a 3rd term? Have you thought any more about if you want to?
I have not. He reached out to give us a little about a heads up that he was going to be suspending his campaign. Tin and I sent him very nice texts telling him we were proud of him, proud to know him, proud to support him. And then, my colleagues chose me to go back on judiciary in the middle of all of these things. We just had a FISA reauthorization markup, which, by the way, was very bipartisan out of judiciary, 35-2, which is holding this administration, future administrations accountable for warrantless surveillance of American citizens. So I fully anticipate he's going to run for a 3rd term. I hope he runs for a 3rd term. I think he's been a good governor, and I would be more than happy to support him. And I'm going to concentrate on what we got going on here. Now, if something else changes it, then we'll look at it then. But I couldn't ask my colleagues to go on two of the most important committees in Congress and then have one foot out the door just waiting for the next shoe to drop. So I'm going to concentrate on the work we got out in front of us out here.
Well, that's I think the last question I want to ask you too is circling back to where we started. Leading a delegation like this is a big deal. You've really in a relatively short, and you've been there a few terms now, but in a relatively short time, you've really kind of raised up the ranks in the House caucus in a fast way. Talk about that a little bit. Like you said, you're on a couple of influential committees. You're leading this delegation. That would, if you were to decide to run for governor or something, I gotta think that would be tough to leave behind.
Yeah, I'm proud of the work we've done out here. I'm proud of the relationships we've made out here. I think we give in a really unique time and sometimes a very frustrating time, we've had the skill set to advocate for the things that are important in North Dakota and be able to engage in some of the meanest, nastiest, pettiest politics I think we've seen in our lifetime, at least, and do it in a way where we still want to fight about ideas and not fight about people. And I like it out here. Sometimes it's a grind. 10 weeks in a row without seeing my family gets a little tough. But in the realm of sacrifices people have made for our country, that is not even within in the ballpark of ones that people have made. But yeah, we're proud of the work we do. I'm proud of my staff, and I'm glad I have the support of North Dakotans, and I like doing this job.
Kelly, I've got one final question. You know, 10 weeks where you were stuck in Washington trying to elect a speaker. And I think when we talked, you were a little frustrated. You missed out on a lot of hunting, but you did get back here in time for deer season. Did you shoot a deer?
I did. And I will tell you, Chad, when you spend as much time out here as I do, you know what's cooler than shooting a deer? Getting to hunt
by yourself?
Getting to being with your son, your dad, and your brother, and getting to do those things. And I got to see some of my buddies that don't care about politics. We got to go snow goose hunting. We got a mallard hunt in, and it's really good way to stay grounded in what's really important in Western North Dakota. Also, it's a good message to take to climate change and to COP for people who think Western North Dakota is a Superfund site. We live, work, and play out there too, and we care about clean air, clean water, and we can do some really cool things in Western North Dakota. And a lot of people get to stay in Western North Dakota now because of the oil and gas industry, and I'm proud of that too.
It's relevant to be concerned about the impact of any industry on our environment. We all want to protect it, but man, if you think Western North Dakota is a Superfund site, go visit. It's beautiful.
More importantly, anybody who graduates from high school can stay there and build a career now, and that wasn't the case when I graduated.
Well, yeah, everybody.
It just wasn't.
Well, North Dakota's young people had to leave. There was no jobs here. They had to go somewhere else. All right.
Erin graduated from Ray. I'm assuming when she graduated from high school, there weren't a lot of jobs in Ray, and I bet there's more of them now.
Not a lot of people thinking about sticking around in Ray back when she graduated, but you're right. I mean, it's a different town. It's a different place.
Yeah.
Kelly, thanks for the time.
Thanks,
Kelly.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Finished up our interview with Congressman Armstrong. I do think it's a big deal. I know a lot of people sometimes it's like, oh, delegation, conference. Like, we hear so much of this stuff. I am gratified that we're starting to have conversations that include oil producers, right? Because I don't care how you feel about it. You know, I when I said that you can only make peace with your enemies, right? You can only compromise with people you disagree with. So if we want a path forward on this, we want to actually accomplish things and do things with this, it can't just be one side imposing its will on the other. That's not going to work, and that's not going to, produce any sustainable solution. So I'm glad that this is happening, and I'm hopefully we can get by some of the pie in the sky, if we just build wind turbines everywhere, everything will be okay. No, that's not going to work. We got to have a better solution than that, and that's. Sorry, go ahead. Again,
it's my frustration as somebody left of center living in this part of the country. I see the benefits and the importance of cheap, affordable fossil fuels and the jobs that they create and all those kind of things. And this idea that, I think it was Clinton in 2016 said we're going to put a bunch of coal miners out of business. That's not going to happen. We are going to continue to need coal. We're going to continue to need petroleum. Kelly said in his press release, 10 years from now, we're going to have more EVs and we're going to be burning more oil.
Right.
Both of those things can be real. And I believe that's right.
Yeah.
We need to figure out how to do it cleaner and more rapidly, right? I mean, I see the climate changing. I'm worried about climate change. We can't continue to just sort of slow our roll. But it's going to take technology to get us there because we're not.
And that's where both sides of it come through. I mean, I think I don't know if you want to call it the right or the oil producing, the fossil fuel side. We need to acknowledge they have to exist. We can't live without them. Or if we try to live without them, I mean, the economic implications are going to be devastating. I mean, you think inflation and cost of living. What do you think is going to happen to Americans living paycheck to paycheck when their energy costs start going through the roof? Or, what's going to happen to vulnerable Americans when our electrical grid can't be relied on anymore? I mean, those are real problems that we can't just ignore. On the other side, the fossil fuel people need to be prodded to go a little faster. and to invest a little more and do a little more. So, again, we got to talk to each other and not, turn up our nose like, oh, Kelly Armstrong's, got a background in oil. Well, he's somebody you should listen to.
I also appreciate, the idea that we're going to go to these third world countries whose living standards are so much below us and say, hey, you don't deserve cheap, affordable energy because it's too dirty. We don't get to go to them and say, when they're trying to feed their family and do all these different things, that you just have to do this even though it's more expensive. We need to figure out how to work with them. And I think Kelly's point about American companies are the best to do this kind of stuff. And we can't just wish this. It's going to take a big, heavy lift and being at the table. And I'm with you. I'm glad Kelly's there. I'm glad to hear Kelly say climate change is real. And I think he said that a lot in the past as well. This is an economic issue. That we need to move.
Yeah. The other thing I thought was, we talked about the impeachment stuff. I think it's really interesting that he's not endorsing Donald Trump. And I don't want to read a lot into it, but, he can say, well, I've been super busy. Well, okay. Yeah. Everybody's busy. I don't, if you were going to endorse him, you should endorse him. And the thing is, like, I'm glad. Everybody knows what my position on Donald Trump is. So, it disappointed me, then surprised me that Senator Kramer, endorsed Donald Trump immediately after Doug Burgum got out. It surprised me a little bit that John Hoeven did, and that's really disappointing. Because Hoeven, I don't think has any need to do it, but I think he's doing it maybe just to protect his right flank a little bit and to avoid some headaches. But Kelly's not. And I think I don't know how to look at that other than that's a choice. He's making a choice.
Let's be clear. Kelly has made it very, very clear if Donald Trump's the nominee, he's going to support him.
If it's a choice between Biden and Trump, yes.
Yeah, he would have raised his hand at that Republican primary. And Kramer's comments after Burgum dropped out, it was almost like, he did it he endorsed Burgum out of respect for North Dakota, but
it was very
with Trump the whole time.
It was very patronizing. I looked at the comments. I was like, that's very patronizing. It's like you're giving Doug a pat. It's like when your kid draws you a picture and you tell your kid it's your favorite picture of all time, even though there's way better pictures out there that you like more, but you're not going to tell your kid that. Right? That's kind of felt like what he did, right? And it's like, ugh. And then Donald Trump's on the Scott Hennon show, and they're like, oh, Donald Trump. They're like, I do not understand it. I didn't know
Donald Trump was on Scott Hennon show.
Yeah, he called in. I guess I didn't listen to it. I saw a report about it though, but yeah, he was on, and it was a love fest.
Doesn't seem like a very efficient way to speak to Americans to call into a low-rated AM talk radio show. But
okay, well, that could be. I don't know, but he was on there. And what do you make of the talk about Doug Burgum being in Donald Trump's cabinet? And I feel like, because I saw it in the New York Times. The New York Times referenced, I think it was a Daily Beast report. The Daily Beast report was referencing like unnamed Trump officials, but they were saying like, oh, Doug Burgum's like out of central casting to be in the administration and everything. And so I have a theory about that. And my theory is Donald Trump needs somebody like Doug Burgum a lot more than Doug Burgum needs Donald Trump.
I also think those national publications think that everybody's goal is to go to Washington, D.C. and be part of the cabinet. They're obviously good jobs, but I agree with you. Donald Trump needs Doug Burgum. The Trump camp would want Doug Burgum to be part of his cabinet more than I would imagine Doug Burgum would want to be a part of the cabinet. Let's think about this. You sort of wrote about this in your column. If your goal is to be a candidate for president in 2028.
And that's also us assuming that's what Doug wants. I think it is.
But if that's the goal, I think you have three options, right? It's to join the Trump administration and all the potential baggage that comes along with that.
Including potential criminal indictments.
Right. Or you run for governor again, or you take a break. You're a billionaire or close to. Travel around to these states, build relationships, donate to different candidates, and build sort of a national profile that way. The question I would have is, is it easier to build a national profile as governor of North Dakota or is the former governor of North Dakota with more freedom? I don't know the answer to that, but I think either of those paths, if you're looking at 2028, might be the way to go.
Being the governor of North Dakota is a lot of freedom. I mean, the governor, I don't want to say the governor has a lot of downtime, but we're a small state. Our legislature's in session every other year for 80 days. I'm not saying there's not day-to-day work to be done, but there's a lot of day-to-day work that can be delegated or can be handled remotely. So, I mean, he could be, I guess if my calculation would be you run for a third term, you still have the status of being governor. By the way, that gives you another crack at the legislature to do some things that would sound good in a Republican campaign. Like maybe you finish getting rid of the income tax. We could have a debate about whether or not that's what North Dakota needs. But that's an accomplishment that if you're going to a bunch of voters who aren't North Dakotans, yeah, I would support getting rid of I don't want to make it sound like I'm against getting rid of the income tax. I would get rid of the income tax. But I understand a lot of North Dakotans are like, well, I don't pay much in income tax. What's the big deal? But when you're going and talking to people in New Hampshire, like, I made North Dakota a no income tax state, that's a great talking point. So I say run for governor again. I think it's low risk. If he wants it, he's in. I don't think somebody like Kelly Armstrong, who I do believe wants to be governor, he said he's not going to challenge Doug.
No. I think the flip side to that is I do think you're right that if he does run for a third term, and I think chances are he will, that he will have a very, very conservative agenda going into this next session to show some accomplishments. If it's on income taxes, if it's on school choice, if it's on, a lot of different things. Now, the flip side of that is there's potential danger in having to deal with Jeff Magrum and all these legislators, when you're fighting with your own party all the time and they're calling you a rhino. I mean, if you're Doug Burgum and you've been on this stage, you really want to go and deal with the North Dakota Senate? You really want to deal with Jeff Magrum calling you a rhino? I mean, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, Doug Burgum's going to do what Doug Burgum wants to do.
I think that we care a lot more in North Dakota what Jeff Magrum thinks than people in New Hampshire and Iowa.
Yeah. But you also have a chairman of the Republican Party who's on the RNC who has expressed dismay over the current governor. I mean, you have a national committee woman, right? I mean, Lori Hintz, who has said isn't a huge fan of the governor. I mean, those people do have a little bit of juice within the RNC.
They do.
They're not going to affect the votes that much in New Hampshire, but it might be a bit of a pain. I don't know. I think he runs again. I think he runs and then he has a super, super conservative agenda, which terrifies me. And we go from there.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to see the agenda, but I'm, let's get her done. So,
yeah. I mean, again, you're mostly wrong when it comes to policy, and I'm mostly right.
Well, but neither of us are evil. We're just wrong. Which is, by the way, how it should be. I long for the days when Rob and Chad could just talk about how much we disagree about the tax code, as opposed to a lot of this other stuff that we end up agreeing on. Because we are slowly becoming a post-small L liberal. Yep. This is a classically liberal society. What else do we want to talk about? Oh, terrible news from Senator Kramer's office. That was a gut blow. There's the family of a deputy, Paul Martin, in Mercer County that are hurting today. So terrible. I guess by now I'm assuming everybody listening to this knows the news, but according to a press release from Senator Kramer's office, his son, Ian Kramer, was having some sort of a mental health episode. He was talking about wanting to go and be with his deceased brother, Ike. Chris Kramer, Senator's wife, was attempting to take him to the emergency room, presumably to get care, obviously, at which point he was able to get behind the driver's seat of their SUV. He took off. Police chased. He was spotted in Hazen, I guess. And as he was trying to get away from police, he ended up running into a deputy who was on the side of the road trying to deploy apparently tire spikes to slow him down. So the deputy died. There's a lot of people hurting. I have seen already a little bit. I mean, Twitter is what it is. It's not even worth. There's jerks on Twitter, big, breaking news, I guess. But to me, it's just not a political situation at all. I look at this. I know the struggle. I wrote a column about it. My oldest sister died last year, and she had mental health problems and addiction problems, and we tried to help her for years. At one point, my parents were done. I tried to have her move into my home to give her a place to be stable and to maybe hopefully build a life and get a job. And it didn't work out. And it became a situation where I had to choose my kids and my wife over my sister, who was creating a situation that just wasn't safe. And I had to ask her for leave, and asked her to leave, and there were some hard words spoken, and those are some of the last words I ever said to her. She died, last year in Virginia, alone and far from her family. And I'm a little emotional about it still, but these things happen in families, and they're terrible, and they can happen to any family, and mental health can touch any of us. So I don't. For the Martin family, it hurts. And for the Kramer family, it hurts. It's terrible all the way around.
And we are 16 to 18 hours removed from this incident that took place. I mean, there's a time for having deeper conversations about what happened. I mean, I think you wrote about that there's got to be accountability in that kind of stuff. But you're absolutely right. When you start talking about mental health, we've got a mental health crisis in this country. We have an addiction crisis in this country. I don't know how many stories you hear about opioids and how that's affecting, people who have, got injured on the job or whatever. And next thing you know, these terrible things are happening. But now I think it's a time for people to show a little bit of grace to the Kramer family. But really have this family in Mercer County. It's my understanding that this officer who passed away, this deputy, 3 kids, obviously a wife. I assume that the Mercer County Sheriff's Office is a very small place, very close place. These are small town North Dakotans. I assume this deputy has touched a lot of people's lives.
He's from Beulah. Yeah, he's from Beulah. So, I mean, small town North Dakota. And not that matters. I mean, a life is a life. And it's terrible. And I think the larger thing is the point that I really wanted to get across is this is a United States Senator's family. Kevin Kramer's a very successful man. I would find it hard to believe that they weren't getting Ian Kramer all the resources that they could, but this is the struggle. A lot of times the people who are struggling with these things, they are adults, and they have a degree of, short of like court-ordered stuff, they have autonomy. They're allowed to make choices, even if they're bad choices, even if they're terrible choices, they're allowed to make them. Not criminal choices, obviously. There's consequences for that. But, this incident is making news because it involves the family of a United States Senator. There's a lot of this kind of stuff. Maybe not a police officer getting killed, but there's a lot of people who get hurt, domestic violence, verbal violence. There's a lot of people, even people get killed because of mental health problems. I would be surprised if there were very many people listening to this right now or who read my column who couldn't talk about somebody in their family or in their circle of friends who went through something not dissimilar to this.
Right. And I think, Rob, your point about, Kevin Kramer is a U.S. Senator, this is getting more publicity. The fact that there's an officer that was involved, it's going to get a lot more attention than most cases. I also think your point about Kevin and Chris Kramer likely had access to the best care possible, and that their son needed to, you're not going to get better until you accept that you want to get better. And sometimes you're having a mental health crisis. You can't put yourself in a headspace where you're not
making rational decisions because you're afflicted by a mental health issue.
But I think when we start thinking about access to these services, there aren't enough services. And when you talk about the people living maybe who aren't U.S. senators and who are not upper middle class, we need to figure out how to get those folks the help they need. And again, talking about opioids and those kind of things, that's affecting everybody. That's affecting all of our communities. But we need to figure out how to do something. I mean, I hear stories, I talk to a lot of people who work in schools where there's students struggling with mental health issues, and they can't find a place to send those kids. Like, there's no beds, or the bed is 200 miles away. So now we're moving kids 200 away from their family and their network because there's just not a place for them to get the care they need. We need to really be thinking about this. And again, is there a way for something good to come out of this tragedy? And I don't want to get into like, what's the government role? I mean, I'm not saying this is a government role. This could be a private sector role to make sure that services are available to everybody.
I mean, I think it's an everything role. I think it's private sector. I think it's employers. I think it's families. I think it's, churches, civic groups. It's everybody. We got to do something to improve this, but again, this story is making news because of the people involved, but I'm telling you, there's so many stories out there that don't make news, that only show up maybe as numbers in statistics. And, I hate to say that silver lining is the wrong word, but if there's anything good that could come from this, maybe it puts a human face on an issue that is much bigger than Senator Kramer and his family, or in what happened yesterday.
When I think it's also a good time to reflect on Kevin Kramer's politics are not politics I agree with. But Kevin Kramer is a dad. I'm a dad. He's lost a son to addiction, and now he's had a son who went through this mental health crisis. If we can't, as a society, Democrat, Republican, or anybody else, figure out how to have some level of empathy towards the Kramer family and the folks in Mercer County who are going through this tragedy, we are so broken. And so I think thinking about the Kramer family and what they're going through, this is not political.
If your first impulse when you heard about this was to make a political point, or to get in a political jab, or to dunk on the senator and his family, the problem is you're the problem. You need to take some time off and think about that, and think about what your priorities are, because there's plenty of time. It doesn't mean you have to agree with what Senator Kramer has to say about Social Security or taxes or anything else, but you do have to treat him like a human being. And I think that is so much of the problem, is we are not treating people on the other side of the cultural divide, or the political divide. We treat them like an other, like they're something less than human, and that we could just, think about them in ways. They're just us. They're just us with different opinions. That's all they are. They're just humans.
And not even just different partisan politicals, but if you have somebody who's a different religion, different sexual orientation, all these different things.
Different economic class.
Yeah. I mean, just people trying to get through the day, right? And so I think all of us should reflect on how we think about people who are maybe different or think differently than us. And at the end of the day, these type of things, you're right, Rob, it can happen to anyone. No matter what your race, sexual orientation, class, status are. These kind of things can happen to anyone, and it's an absolute tragedy.
I think you put it well. We're all just trying to get through the day. I think that's a good place to stop it. Chad, thanks as always. I'm trying to think of what I always try to think of what I'm coming up, but I don't know. I booked
whatever. You'll start worrying about it on Monday.
Probably. That's usually what I do. I usually write my print columns like an hour before the deadline, because I'm afraid I'm always afraid too, if I like book the podcast too far out, or I plan on writing something too far out, then like other things happen that become more interesting to me. And then it's like, oh, I'm locked into this now. So I don't know. That's my way. I fly by the seat of my pants. Anyway, thank you as always for listening, and we'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? at inforum.com/podcasts. We have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.